Hello. Today I'm going to tie for you a crane fly. So I was looking at fishing reports and saw a list of flies that may or may not be productive this time of year, and one of the bugs in the list was a crane fly. So I've never tied one. So I'm going to do today's fly on a 200R size 14. I'm going to use several threads. I'm going to use this thicker white ultra thread, UTC thread for the underbody. I'm going to color it with Lt Cahill, kind of a yellow colored, and rib it with a doubled over strand of this dark brown. I'm going to use a Grizzly Hackle. That's about a size 16, but it's going to work for us in this case. And I'm going to use gray poly for the wing, and I got to knot pheasant tail fibers for the first time. I've seen them in other flies, mostly wet flies, and I've never really had the need to or felt the urge to try and do this, but here we go. So I'm going to try and show you how I did it. I watched a couple of videos. This way seemed to work. I made a loop and pinched it between my fingers, reached through with the tweezers, and basically you're just making the knot. So we'll keep this one toward the end. I'm going to trim those feet to length when I'm all done. I'm going to put 2 knots in each set. Now there are 2 fibers there obviously, and I think the critical thing here is kind of the spacing. So we'll get that through without getting the knot cut, and we'll fiddle around to get the spacing the way we want it. And there we go, one leg. So I think there's a fast way to do that where you can use your vise as the third hand, put the pheasant feather in the vise and kind of use both hands to tie the knot. You can just kind of buzz up and down and do a bunch of them that way. So here I'm starting that thicker white thread. Going to do a thread base all the way back to the barb of the hook. I'm going to come forward. Now, I never saw a crane fly before, or never really paid attention, but I did a quick search on the internet, looked at an image, and the one I saw was kind of bulbous, was a little thicker here in the back, so that's what I'm going to do. So I'll go back and forth to just in front of the hook point, and then back to the just above the barb. Do a few passes and get it thicker in the middle. And we'll quit there and run to the front. I'm going to whip finish and cut this heavier white thread off. And here's something I kind of struggled with all day, the snipping off the excess thread. It was just one of those days when it came to that. So get that Lt Cahill thread started. And there, I again didn't hold on to the butt end enough and eventually chewed through, and there are some fibers, but we'll get them tied down and covered up and they won't be a problem. So I'm going to go back and forth over the underbody a couple of times to change the color here. And then this is where I'm going to tie in that doubled over section. This was 6/0 brown, dark brown Uni Thread. I'm just going to tie it in on top. If any of that does show through, the thinking here is that the dorsal side, the upper side of the bug tends to be darker anyways. But at the end of the day, after a couple of passes, I don't think much of it showed through. So I'm left-handed, and as I wrap, the Uni Thread kind of flattens out for me, so I don't have to stop as often to flatten out thread. So in this case, that works great. In other cases, it's a pain because I have to stop and twist my bobbin. And that looks good. We'll do a nice layer over that thinner front section, fill in this little low spot. And since I'm going to use the rotary feature, I'm going to put a couple of whips here. Throw the thread over the bobbin cradle, and I've got a loop here now as soon as I get a hold of it. And I'll give you a quick look at my dubbing twister. It's the Swiss dubbing twister, but I'm starting to kind of like that. So hanging in there, throw the thread over my finger and give that a spin. Takes only a couple of seconds, and I'm twisted up and ready to do this for the rib. Now I think you could have put the rib in flat. I don't know, I got in the habit of making round ribs and they stick out a little bit. I don't know if it adds something to the fly. I just like this look now, so that's what I do. And we'll space them out pretty good. They're going to look like segmentation. So I'll pass that back and forth underneath a couple of times just to get the brown thread tied down. And we'll cut that off and get it out of the way. So we're going to come right back, and as soon as I get that, I was trying to capture those two little ends I left there, but they're not going to matter. Now I'm going to put a couple of whips here again, cut off this thread, and the reason is I'm going to do a couple of these at a time so that I can use head cement and actually Sally Hansen Sarge's nails on the body, and I'll stick it in a cork and let it dry. I'll get some on there with the brush, but I'm going to use the bodkin to kind of spread it around and remove any excess. Something like that. I took most of the excess off. It'll soak in, and I think we're good to go. I'm going to put that in the cork, and I'll switch to the one that I did a little earlier. It'll be dry. So we have the dry one in the vise. We're going to get the thread started again. Now I'm going to go about halfway back toward the point, and that's where I'm going to tie the legs in. So the picture I saw had two legs on each side, and I don't know, just looking at the picture, the first set of knots was about even with the back of the body, so that's what I did, more or less. When I fiddle with them, then I realized if I get them all bent around, they're going to be in the way. So having them lay back along the side at the beginning is probably the right thing anyways. And come in with the other two on the far side. Get a couple of good turns there, and again, fiddle with them, but doesn't really matter at this point. And I'm going to snip off the excess. I was thinking if I let those butt sections there, it would be nice and level up front, but it really didn't. It tapered a little bit anyways. So I stripped off the end of that Grizzly hackle and I tied it in while I'm winding down the butts. So I think we have everything where it needs to be. And I'm going to take a couple of wraps and kind of move toward the center of that thorax, I guess you could call it. And that's where we're going to tie in a clump of this poly. So I put two wraps there, kind of loose, I didn't pull it real tight yet. And I'm going to get a nice little crisscross action going on here. We'll go back and forth across them. And I'm pulling a little tighter now, so they'll probably stay where I put them. Now I got stray hairs everywhere, so we're gonna go to town with the scissors and snip off all that excess. I know I'm dangerously close to my thread there, but I've managed to snip off most of these. Didn't take off my thread inadvertently, so I'm good to go. So I'm going to jump ahead and tie in the other two legs. And again, from the picture, this is what I saw. There's probably other patterns or other ways to do this, but first timer here on the crane fly, so I don't know. And if I think I was doing this right, I think they should have kicked up in the air and then the feet should have kind of kicked back down. And I could have spent a little more time trying to line all this up, but I think once you go to cast this after the first cast, all bets are off. And I think it just looks like a straggly mess, or it will. So we'll trim off our butt sections and wind the hackle forward. So I have a lot of room. I can get 4 or 5 turns behind the wings. And on the camera, you can see I'm capturing a couple of those polyfibers as I go, but didn't really see that with the naked eye. So I crossed over underneath, and I'm going to get 2 or 3 turns of hackle in front of the wings. And bump my tripod while I'm at it. So here we are, we've got the hackle tied down. And we'll start to trim that out and clean up that mess again. Got a few more. I hope I'm not stealing this word from, I've heard Cheech say it, he calls them haters. I'm going to put a couple of wraps underneath those legs just to kind of make sure they kick up. Don't get it over the eye. And pull everything back. And I'm going to go to the back of that little head I made and do a back to front whip finish. Okay, we pulled that tight. Snip that off. And then we'll do a bunch of primping and pruning. Like I said, first cast and especially after the first fish, all bets are off and this stuff's going to be sticking out in all directions. And I think that's kind of probably the idea. Look like some kind of distressed bug on the water. The way I did the body, I think this is going to float, but I think it's going to float like pretty deep into the surface film. You could probably trim that hackle underneath too and make it lay flat. I don't know. Again, first time, haven't fished this, and the inspiration was looking at fishing reports. Everything's slow and clear, and this crane fly was in the list. Now, I don't know. They could have meant crane fly larva for all I know, but I hadn't done this, and it was kind of an inspiration, so I did it. Okay, so that was more or less what I wanted. Went back into primping mode. It's about here I expected to pull one of these legs free and have it break off, but it didn't. Probably the first fish will take out a couple of those legs though. And since I was using yellow thread, I feel like the head in the picture and I think it should have been darkened up, so I just hit it with the marker. Zoom out. I'll eventually put on a little drop of Sally Hansen's on that whip finish. Eventually, after we trim off a few more of these stray fibers. It's kind of like your sideburns. You try and make them even, you go a little higher, then you go a little higher yet, and pretty soon you don't have any. So I better quit while I'm ahead. Here's my another drop of Sally Hansen's. Let that soak into the whip finish. And basically I'm going to quit there. So I don't know. It looked like the picture of the crane fly I saw. Maybe it'll help you out. If you want to learn more about me, look me up on Amazon. And until next time, be safe.